The housing crisis is wreaking havoc nationally. Our podcast discusses how it is playing out specifically in Black Berkeley, California, chronicling the lived experiences behind what people call gentrification, detailing our endeavor for our right to stay and our right to return. Brought to you by Healthy Black Families. I am your host, Deb, and this is Telling Our Stories, the Housing Chronicles. Welcome. This is part 2 of our 3-part interview with key members of Friends of Adeline, Miss Ritchie Smith, Willie Phillips, Mendonca, and Chris Schildt. In episode 13, they shared how they landed in their city known as Berkeley, California. And we ended with Willie Phillips' poignant correlation between what has steadily been happening for a very long time to Palestinians in occupied Palestine and what has steadily been happening for a very long time to Black people here in the United States. This brings me to equity for Black Berkeley. Oh, yes. Mari?
I mean, I don't know if I can follow all of that because that just captured all of it. But if you're going to pivot into equity for Black Berkeley, I want to just highlight, and I appreciate you, Willie, for saying it is Palestine, right? And then take it another step further if we go back to the beginnings of this creation, experiment, social, whatever it is here, colonizing, occupation. You talk about moving people into smaller places, right? The natives who lived here, indigenous folk, were pushed into small spaces so it's the exact same thing. And it's interesting in the 21st century, as much as one wants to, or the powers that be have to continue their propaganda and all of that scheme, the jig is kind of up. It's very obvious. I mean, you can go to the lengths that you're going to, where, we've known you've committed genocide of these powers all over the globe. So we're not naive of that. Okay, yes, we're in positionalities where it's very hard for us to combat it, and on the simplest level, Friends of Adeline and many other wonderful organizations in the community are trying to combat that. Obviously, the positionality of the powers that be is kind of like, right. I mean, good luck with that, right? Especially when we see that news coverage. I mean, a lot of entities are controlling the narrative. And even though we know what the truth is, like, it's kind of absurd in another level, right? We know what the truth is, but we got news people saying it, like mainstream media, like newspapers, and people are just happy to just continue to like bold-faced lie. Are you kidding me? So that's something to highlight from that. And then I think as we move into equity for Black Berkeley, I would highlight that if we do the math and we talk about colonization, imperialism from all of its history, okay, so we don't even have to just talk about this soil, but globally, right? The goal of that was to extract and exploit at the expense of whoever. It doesn't matter. Wherever we land in, we're extracting, we're exploiting, we're getting rid of, moving fools out of the way, going to do what we're here to do because this is our world, right?
Right.
And so just to identify in terms of the fights that we have in our community on this soil, the American culture is not to find equity. That's not a goal. So for us to be sitting here talking and moving into pivoting to talk about equity for Black Berkeley, equity is not a goal of this system. The American thing is not about equity. The foundation of American culture is not about equity. It is a rhetoric that is thrown around along with many other rhetoric I think that's more so what the American and colonial message is, to upfront use a lot of great words and yummy sounding kumbaya, right? Like, we're coming together, we care, like our housing crisis and the folks who want housing now, and shame, because I feel like that's the most worst evil that you could commit on humanity, is to say you're standing for something, using that narrative like you are a savior, like you care, while you're undermining all of every aspect of humanity, whether that's climate and right, everything that it takes for us to survive. Like we said, Indigenous folks were stewarding the earth. They understood that we are part of this whole, and that we honor and that we respect and we revere. So to come with that type of rhetoric, to come with that type of evil, to be destroying all the while acting like you're saving is the worst crime against humanity and all of life. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back, because you got us on this track. So I'm going to go back and ask you guys what your understanding of equity for Black Berkeley is. But I want to stay on this strain for a little bit and talk about, because there's a connection I'm hearing between when you were talking about that pain, that pain of coming to understanding, like coming out of the baloney and into actual understanding, and the pain that's associated with that. And for a lot of us, the legacy and the trauma, right, that we shoulder, right? I feel like I don't know if you guys saw a video clip of one of the women that was on the boat, and on the boat that was due to sail out of the port. And what she said a lot, but the one I want to highlight here is, people, when there's atrocious things that have happened in history, people place themselves like, oh, if I was there, of course I would do this. But what you are doing right now is what you would have done during the Holocaust, right? So she was actually doing that flipping of time, which is, I'm going back to when what is happening now is happening, and we're not all doing what we need to be doing in every way, right? In every way, whether it's housing for people who are out in the streets, whether it's international solidarity work, whatever it is, when people are at the point of decimation, which is what happens in the streets of Berkeley when you don't have housing, right? Anywhere. So I have a question about, how do you frame, as I hear your stories and I understand how you come into the work, my question is, how do we bring people into this, right? Like, my cynical self says their backs have to be up against the wall. They have to experience things to a certain extent, right? Vietnam, body bags, then I'm going to go out into the streets, right? So I guess I want to pick your brains about how do we bring people into the work? And I really want you guys to give me like one or two, like, these are my best practices, because you're all hardcore organizers and have been for a very long time. And I know that the work needs to happen before backs are to the wall. Momentum will take place when backs are to the wall, but how do we position ourselves specifically before that happens, so that when the backs do get to the walls, we can move in the right direction, versus what you were talking about earlier, Mari, which is this whole system is not set up for that. And so what's the pivot?
If I may, not to
Please.
bogart my way into the answer of that. But that is a very complicated question. I think we're seeing that is why a lot of us are burned out.
Yes.
And spread very thin. I mean, Miss Ritchie said she just came from 3 meetings. I think Chris was in probably the same amount, and Willie as well. Like, right? We're like all day.
This is why I opened with what I opened. I'm so grateful to have all 4 of you in this room, you know? Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things for me, okay, so I could share like my experience, and this is where I'll also give a lot of reverence to Friends of Adeline also, because I was not a founding member. And as a young mother, I had my first daughter for my senior year in high school. And then I had other children and lots of different kinds of life experience, trauma, different things, navigating all of that. And the social issues that had their fathers unable to be all that they could be, and trying to hold space for healing, for all of that, for my own family's experience, for the experience that my children are about to be having, being mixed race and all of that. Like, so holding multiple kinds of spaces. And a lot of us are doing that, right? In this world we live in, we're holding multiple spaces of trying to create wellness and healing and deal with trauma and all of those things, plus like strive for a future, create something that wasn't possible anyway, and all of these things, then to ask us now to organize,
right? To
come together and come to this meeting and come over here and over there. And if we had more people, we could do this and we could do that. And that's all well and good. And, right? It's darn near impossible. And I will add to that scenario that I've spoken to a specific council member who at one point, I forget what the meeting, it was a smaller meeting with a couple of us at the time. I think I was elected to the rent board, part of Friends. I think I was representing as Friends of Adeline, and it was only like 4 of us, 3 community people and the council member. And talking about issues that we confront about housing and equity and all these things. And they said to me and to the other 2 folks who were from community, you need to organize more. You just need to organize more.
Wow.
And I was like, hit the brakes. What? We can be every single person in the room in the council meeting and be unheard.
It happens frequently.
Like every Tuesday, maybe. I said, as an elected, in this point, I really want everyone, I hope this gets out to multiple people. But as an elected, you have mandatory taken ethics training. So it's a mandatory ethics training. In this ethics training, they tell you, as an elected official, you represent your entire community, right? So if you're mayor, you represent the entire community. If you're in a district, you represent that entire district. So it doesn't matter how many more of a certain kind of people or a certain folks of privilege or underprivilege, you represent all of those people.
Yeah.
Right? So I said that. Hey, I have been elected now. I actually went through that process. I know that we take an ethics training, and that ethics training actually lets us and reminds us to remember that as a leader, we are not isolated to our so-called constituents. We are leading in a community, have a responsibility and an accountability to all people. In fact, the City of Berkeley mission statement reiterates that as a mission for the city. So for you as an elected official to tell me I need to organize more, or we need to organize folks who have no access to be participating, that you will not do or move on anything that's equitable unless we organize more, that's an issue. That's a humanitarian issue.
Yeah.
And if folks in Berkeley are unaware of this attitude and mindset within our elected official community, that's a real danger and a problem.
Yeah, Willie. Yeah.
I think the answer is really applies to who's in this room. We all have unique experiences. We all have played specific roles. I think all of us at this table have been on a commission or two. I remember when I was on the planning commission, among other things. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, I know how that operates. Mm-hmm. I've certainly had the opportunity to run for public office. Not that stupid, obviously. So, but even with that said, we all have a specific role. I know how difficult it is to organize, because it comes back to the very fact that you have to always come back. It's like having a student that has impediment in learning and realizing that
I love that analogy.
Patience is everything. Even some of those dumb people who essentially don't get it. And I'm saying there's a lot of those people, actually, in particular those who have privilege, that just can't understand why people are struggling when you have all this opportunity around you. You have a university. You have a world-class university. But let me tell you a secret. There was a time where basically people who live in South Berkeley were isolated. Basically, people were told that were affiliated with the university, don't go down to South Berkeley because you might end up being attacked. It was crime there. Now, I would walk to the university. But even when I turned around and looked back, and even when I was in the classroom, where essentially students were basically grew up in South Berkeley, but never been to the university. Never been. And that's on a half an hour walk. To be honest with you, we live in a very isolated, very insular world. And being able to organize requires that you have to go outside of yourself. Mm-hmm. And you have to realize that you're part of a whole, that you are not the beginning or the ending. I don't want someone to impose their idea that they're colonizing me and that they're helping me to basically get beyond my particular needs and goals. Because the very fact is that it comes from every individual can play a specific role through their own experience. It requires that you have to teach and learn, because if you're teaching, you're going to learn something as well. I learn more from my students than I have from teaching, actually. Mm-hmm. One particular thing, and again, I'm going to close. I had a student that grew up in South Berkeley. His family was slinging drugs, and uncle basically grew up. He had been tempted to go on that other side in terms of criminal activity. He robbed a bank. He got away with it, actually. He was a driver at that point in time. But he decided to go back to school, actually. And he got his degree in urban planning, actually, a master's. And he worked at San Francisco Port as being one of the people that was the point person for actually the port at the time in San Francisco during the Willie Brown's era, actually. Mm. He taught me more about city planning than I actually learned from anywhere else. Mm. So the very fact is the role was reversed. But having the ability to realize that you don't know everything and that you're learning as you go along, actually. I wish other people thought the same way, because the very fact is some of these people that were at the Planning Commission didn't seem that like they had anything in mind in terms of dealing with people that were outside of their circle. They were people that were basically benefactors. They were people like realtors. Believe it or not, these are some of the people that I work with, actually. And some of these people never was very inclusive. In fact, I was on a particular board in which I was excluded by the fact that this person would attempt to shut me down when I did speak the truth. And for all intents and purposes, she's now playing a very critical role in changing the landscape of South Berkeley. And needless to say, she is one of those people that have influence, and she's not even from Berkeley. But I realize, in fact, that those are the people that need to be taught. And sometimes it might require some hard demonstrations, even if we have to go back to the level of civil disobedience, if we have to shut down BART, and if we have to basically require, as Mrs. Smith would say, we have to make noise, then essentially so be that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, isolation and then, instilling fear about what goes on outside of that isolation is how power moves. Yeah. And I know, Miss Ritchie, I know you to be let's go out and pull everybody from everywhere that's willing to listen in. So you say a little bit more about that?
Well, you must be inclusive. And in doing so, there are teachable residents. You must go out and mingle and talk, get their attention. That's why I go to the farmers market and meet up with people. I've been handing out Topper announcements, and I get some comments that are strange. Some of them prick my attention. Why are you trying to do this? Take people's homes. And I said, it didn't say that. I said, this is in agreement. What someone plans to do, they plan to sell their property. What they're interested in is the residuals that they'll get from the property. If they get the requested amount, it should not matter. But they want to add something into the ingredients to disencourage someone else that might be interested in following through on that, checking it out. And I tell them, you don't have the essence of this, the real meaning of it. You're coming up with some of the unprinted ideas that's in this flyer. So would you like one so that you might take it home in a quiet place and study it? But that's how I said, and I could share the history of this locale because I've learned something for 71 years, and it all wasn't rosy. I know some history here. I took some notes. Mm-hmm. I can tell you about the venues here, the buildings, who occupied those buildings. And people that look like me could only come in here and occupy a building, probably renting it from someone. But this is the only place that people look like me could reside, could live. So that street right out there was the dividing line.
And that street was?
Grove Street. Mm-hmm. It's not Martin Luther King. I said, but I don't lump everybody together. I want to have dialogue, converse with people and see where they're coming from. I said, because some of these people that occupied, bought homes in here, worked for some person. They were either the nanny, the housekeeper, the gardener, mm-hmm. the dog walker. And they had been trying to acquire a loan from the bank right on this corner and were not allowed to do that. So they was disheartened, didn't know what to do. They went to work and shared it with their employer. And the employee listened with great patience and said, well, give me the information. I'd like to look it over. that employer went and made the agreement, drew up everything, and said, now you can either pay this amount to me, or you can pay it to this institution for the resident that you live in. And when you finish the last payment, it goes into your name. So I don't lump everybody together. There are some human beings out there that have hearts and meaning lives, and know that there are human beings in different colors. And I always say, my new motto is, I'm not black, I'm a person of color, and you can't find 6 of us the same shade. And they are not white, they're pink. They're pink. And my friends make a joke out of it with me. Tells me, now you know I'm pink. But that's life. And we carry on. I've met some genuine people, and I've met some that rather than look at my brown face, they look at the ground when they pass me. And I endure this down in my neighborhood. I have people that are businesses that are moving in. And my first intent and aim is to go and introduce myself. Welcome to my neighborhood.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I try to find out where they arrive from and what their interest is for my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I've been here 71 years and I claim it as mine, and I take care of it like that. Well, I haven't been here that long. I've been here 10 years. I said, well, you got a ways to travel. But I'm here. I take care of this, and we can travel it together harmoniously if you'd like. But I'm here. Mm-hmm. And welcome to my neighborhood.
Yeah, Miss Ritchie, I've seen you out there doing what you do, and what this brings up for me is, I've held writing circles for healthy Black families, telling our stories, book circles, and then we publish books. And one of the last one, Volume 9, was about housing insecurity. And one of the things that comes up for me frequently when I think about organizing and community is, and speaking directly to what you were talking about is, and also Chris, the early first meeting that I had with you, pre-meeting to this, where you were talking about what community means and what organizing with Friends of Adeline has meant for you. It's a different kind of get down, right? Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like as you go further down the generations from those of us in this room, community has a very different slant when it comes to space, right? Communities, as I understand it, is built by space, right? Where you are, where you sit, right? Like my neighbors, people I work with, what's around me, how I go out to the farmer's market, hand out flyers, speak to people, right? And I feel like as you go further down, I feel like it really begins with the millennials, but it goes all the way down to, whoever it is now. It's not place. It's because you connect with people via internet, right? Like the community lives via internet. So the sense of place is sort of a nebulous spot. And I'm just saying this as an organizer, as a fellow organizer. One of the hardest things is, because I very much believe in space, and I very much believe in claiming space and taking space and making sure that everyone has space. It's tough, is all I'm saying. It's really tough to do what you do, Ms. Ritchie, because and I don't know if you've seen the change, right? If you've seen the change of year after year, as you go out to the farmer's market, it's not the same people. There's just so much people that move in and move out. They move in, they buy a property, they flip it, they move someplace else. It's not what it used to. People don't buy homes to live in them anymore. It's a very rare thing, right? It's just the sense of space has shifted. And so I feel like that almost has redefined or is attempting to redefine community. And that creates some kind of an issue with organizing, especially when it comes to housing, something as like, yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to speak to that briefly to say that what you're describing, and I'm barely, but I'm a millennial, that technology is a tool. Internet can be a tool. But what is fraying this neighborhood and causing what you're talking about of all these folks coming in and investing and flipping and not staying and not being in community and relationship to each other, I would place the blame much more squarely on capitalism. And the market economy and the investors who see our land, see our homes, see what we've built in this neighborhood as profit or a place to profit. And that what we're doing in building community and community organizing and what Miss Ritchie does every single day, going out, picking up the trash, talking to the people on the street, talking with new business owners, talking with folks who are unhoused, with everybody, introducing herself, saying, welcome to the neighborhood, is frankly the most radical, revolutionary, and powerful organizing that I've seen in my lifetime. And it directly confronts that capitalist desire to just see our neighborhood as a place of profit. And it says, no, I see you as a person. You're going to see me as a person.
Absolutely. And it's hard work.
Yes.
In this meeting that was held today about the activity there on Adeline, they are saying that they're going to concentrate more on this area in trying to see that it's cleaned up. Because as I say, I went out Friday with my blower, my rake, and my bags, and public works supervisor keeps me supplied in material. Gave me a case of orange bags to put the leaves in.
They should be giving you $10,000 a week, but
and supplied me with a brand new grabber because I had worn the other one out. So he came and brought me a new one. But I do that for exercise. It's not strenuous, but it's involved having conversations and running into people that are annoyed. And when I find somebody that's annoyed, I move on. I don't say anything. So they don't know if I heard them or not. I just move in another direction. We have one young man down there that's a paraplegic. He has no arms. And I think I remember him from a youngster from Vietnam, I believe. I think he lost his arms there as a child. But he had the arms. And somebody tells me somebody took them from him, so he's without arms. So he's out there panhandling with a bag in his mouth.
I've seen him.
Yeah, up and down there. And I don't know whether he's high on something. Sometimes he's yelling and screaming and walking in traffic. And he will kick things. He kicked a news rack the other day, and I was out there, and I let him know, I don't appreciate that. Don't do that. So, and he mumbled or said something to me, and one of the young men came along and said, is he giving you a bad time? I said, no, I've handled it. He said, because I'm going to handle it if he is. So,
yeah.
But he disappeared and went on down the street. But I contact people, get acquainted with people, and share the history of the area with them. And I can tell them what businesses were in some of those spaces that they are in right now.
Right. Yeah, it's who you are. You know, I was gonna say what you do out there, but really who you are is a rarity. And in my earlier statement about placement and what I see with the generations further down is something that's getting further and further eroded, right? Like I started off with a question of place, and you so embody that, you know, like the importance of place and what it means in terms of community and how you relate to one another. And there's things about it that are being further and further eroded, even with the best of intentions. There's really bad actors, right? But even with the best of intentions, a lot of people talk about being nomads as if it's a good thing, right? And how and I get it, you know, you want to travel, you want to see different places, you want to live in different places. But I think what happens when you do that and then you look across your shoulder and you're 45 years old or 35 years old and about to have kids you haven't really worked on making a community. So now where are you going to settle down and have your kids? Do you want to be a gentrifier as you're having kids? Which, if you look at South Berkeley, there's a lot of that, right? Like people purchase their first homes and they're like, okay, let's have our kid. And it becomes this hostile town because not only are you not a member of the community, but you don't even know how to become part of the community, right? Because it's, I feel like it's a lost art. But Willie,
I was going to add something because I don't know if you knew Charles Alston. Speaking of someone who was a placeholder, actually. He was actually from L.A., but he came here as a young man. And he had a family, and he lived across the street from, at that time, South Berkeley Library. But he was on a mission, and I had heard that he had gotten this idea by... I actually used to hang out at the office of the flea market, actually. But I can tell you, there's two crossroads, actually, when people are active in one specific item, but they're not aware of another specific area, actually. And as you may know, the flea market has a rich history in terms of context. But even
Willie, I hate to interrupt you there, but I gotta say, like this, the flea market was a big part of who I, as a human being, am. Right? I used to go there every Sunday and like get so much out of being there on many different wavelengths. I just wanted to say that.
And I see that as being part of. People think that it was difficult to catch up with me now. Well, normally what would happen is that I would end up going to the flea market, and people that were trying to catch up with ended up at the flea market. That's the community that I'm talking about, actually. But Charles Alston was someone who actually saw this as a community. And you're talking about an organizer like Mrs. Smith, was the very fact that he built relationships that crossed all barriers, race, age, just on the in terms of his determination. He actually got the idea, as mentioned before, at the flea market, where essentially one of the people that's been actively involved in the community actually has been involved with police reform. Who was very actively involved with the organization that runs the flea market, had no idea of what this issue was. In fact, you think about it, the guy who was there actually, who used to meet frequently, is someone who grew up right down the street from there. But when you look at the areas that people tend to be very insular or isolated, they become more inclined to see things according to their own views without looking outside of that view, actually. Two people running in the same departments, but they don't intersect in some from another. But those are the kinds of things that come a lot of times with people that come with great intentions, but even with that, they don't look outside of themselves and see that there is a bigger and broader community in which they can learn as much as we can learn from them, actually. You know? But I look at it in terms that there are teachers and then there are teachers like Mrs. Smith and for the most part, Charles Alston, actually. And these are people that make a world of difference in your life when you cross paths with them, actually. Mainly because there's the role in which you're building communities through relationships. You know, I'm hoping that even with this journey in terms of how we end this journey in some from another, that we may create value in terms that we can't just build. We have to look at people as being the thing that's is not a commodity, but it's the relationships that you build with people and being able to create the kind of community, create the kind of neighborhood where people are actually talking to each other rather than talking at each other.
Yeah.
That's a difficult process.
It is.
And I think that's one of the things that Friends of Adeline has actually played a very critical role in terms of being involved. I've been involved in a lot of organizations, and needless to say, I'd say that Friends of Adeline is very special in that particular account.
Yeah, yeah. And this goes back to the story you were saying earlier, Ms. Ritchie, about, you know, the person who bought that, whatever weightlifting place, right? Like it's a fast. I'm in a hurry. I got the.
I can't
Yeah, it's
wait.
pace. It's that capitalist pace.
I said, you know what? If you would slow down, clean the property up, and then when you find a prospective leaser, renter, say, now what do you need to make this the way you would like to have it? And you wouldn't have to complain about spending so much money. I said, well, you know, you in too big a rush. You're rushing away.
Yeah.
Yeah, he painted up, and the taggers would come through and tag the new paint. And somebody smashed the window.
Yeah.
And all this, but slow down. So I always say, slow down and smell the coffee. He said, what? I said, slow down and smell. I can't wait. I said, well, you got money that you're throwing up in the air.
You know, Ms. Ritchie, in one of the episodes with Alan Dones, he talks about the community outreach and development. And one of the things he talks about is how important that is. And it's not, and he specifically says it's not because developers are going to start doing it, taking it seriously, not because it's the moral thing to do, but because of what you're talking about. It's the actual correct thing to do for their pockets, right? Because when you actually slow down and you relate to humans and you ask them, what is it that you want? What is going on? You save yourself money, which is your point, but you're also building a different kind of non-adversarial, non-authoritarian ownership. Like it's a different relationship.
Written, edited, and hosted by Deborah Hailu, Telling Our Stories program coordinator at Healthy Black Families, Inc. Audio engineered by Adrian Davis and Salim Naji Ullah of One Hitter Entertainment. Shout out to James Shields of Creative Shields for our beautiful podcast artwork. Akila Shahid, Office and Media Manager at Healthy Black Families, Inc. for the many ways she steps up and bridges our gaps. And Wilhelmina Wilson, Executive Director at Healthy Black Families, Inc. for bringing all of this together. Casting out the net of Black love in service of all humanity, this has been Telling Our Stories, the Housing Chronicles. See you next time.